I can convince you that you do have institutions that can assist us in our task ahead. So, before I get into the legal and institutional mechanisms, I recognize that some of you were not with us in our first regional workshop. So I will give a broad overview as to the MTCC and our project objectives, so that we're all on the same page as to what we're trying to achieve. So the MTCC, it's a project out of the global MTCC network, as Stefan indicated this morning. And we were the first of the MTCCs to be launched in maritime technology, the MTCC Caribbean. And the project is funded by the European Union and implemented by the International Maritime Organization. And the IMO has dedicated PCU, similar to the GLOMI project. There's a project coordination unit that coordinates the deliverables of all the MTCCs. So where are we? As in terms of the global MTCC network, we have essentially all the MTCCs having been constituted. At the time of our workshop, Pacific was just about to be announced, and here we are as part of this global network, with our headquarters being in London, MTCC Caribbean being hosted by the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Then you have MTCC Latin America, hosted by the International Maritime University of Panama. MTCC Africa, who is hosted by the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology in Kenya. MTCC Asia, which is hosted by Shanghai Maritime University in China. And I should say that we had the honor of participating in China's first regional workshop. And this collaboration, we're truly excited about this because Shanghai Maritime University is an amazing institution. I have never seen a maritime university or heard of a maritime university with a staff complement of 2,000, all dedicated to research associated with different aspects of the maritime sector, and a student population of 20,000. So that was an impressive and is an impressive partner, not just for the University of Trinidad and Tobago, but of course for the entire Caribbean region as we embrace our identity as MTCC Caribbean. Then we have MTCC Pacific, which is, I believe, is jointly hosted by the Pacific community as well as the SPREP community based in Suva, Fiji. And in terms of MTCC Pacific, they were also represented at COP23 that took place earlier this month. And we are very fortunate that one of our faculty members also hails from Fiji, and he was our representative at COP23. So through that representation, we also built some synergies between the Pacific, the Caribbean as well. So we are excited to be part of this network, and I really want to infuse that enthusiasm in you as well as we try to progress on this initiative. So what are our aims? How do we hope to achieve this objective? Our aim as MTCC Caribbean is to provide a platform for partnerships. Partnerships are the key to implementation. So partnerships in enhancing energy efficient methods at a global and local level. Specifically, of course, in the Caribbean region, because that's our mandate. To identify environmentally friendly and sustainable technologies that are available to the region. To enhance awareness and uptake of environmentally sound technologies and expertise within the Caribbean region. You know, we think awareness and public education should be easier now because of the social media and the wealth of information that is available on the internet. But then what we also have to appreciate, information overload. We also have to manage the way information is disseminated to clients. You know, you send them 20 PDFs in one document, one email, it's not going to be read. So in terms of the strategy and embracing the strategy, you know, little spoonfuls. To provide advisory and market development services for technology adopters and suppliers. And to monitor regional energy efficiency needs and align training programs meet these needs. So in terms of monitoring the regional energy efficiency needs, this is where one of our key objectives is in fact to create this baseline for the Caribbean region. When we have this baseline, that's when we can actually get into monitoring to determine whether we're making progress. So MTCC Caribbean is mandated to deliver 5 results, in essence. Result 1, formation and establishment of the MTCC Caribbean. So I would dare say we have been successfully established and hosted by the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Our current team complement, our website, our web page is operational. Current team complement, we have 5 of 8 of our team members here, 2 of 3 MTCC officers. In terms of how the center was created, the MTCC was conceptualized and our organogram actually built for sustainability. Myself, Captain Singh, Stefan, our greenhouse gas advisor, Mr. Isikeli Waka, and Sritam Mahbir, we are all full-time members of the University of Trinidad and Tobago, but we have a dedicated portion of time towards this project. Our full-time members of MTCC Caribbean is Michael Razak, Kevin Paris, and Suzette Balkaran. They will be the drivers of this project in the future. Right now, they are in training, and you would have seen the majority of communication coming from these two, our colleagues, and I dare say they are also our graduates of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. And they've been doing us proud. And as I said, with this team, we're building capacity so that they can propel the university and the region forward in terms of this particular project. So we are constituted, as I mentioned, 5 part-time faculty members, as well as 3 full-time members of the university. The university hosts us by providing in-kind support in terms of our where we are actually housed in the university, our IT infrastructure, our communication, all of that is platformed on the university's existing network. So our results, again, result 2, to deliver capacity building workshops, national and regional. As we mentioned, we had our first regional in June of this year, and our next regional will take place at the close of this project. When I say the close of this project, the close of the first phase of this project, which is scheduled to close in 2019, and our tentative date for our second regional project is in November 2019. Result 3 and 4. This is where my colleagues Stefan and Captain Singh will be taking you through in terms of the implementation of our demonstration pilot projects on uptake of ship energy efficient technologies and operations, as well as the implementation of pilot projects on fuel consumption and data collection and reporting in line with the IMO regulations for the region. And of course, visibility is very, very important. It goes in hand with our education campaign. So MTCC to deliver all of the communications and visibility actions as per our work plan. So in summary, that's MTCC Caribbean. This is your MTCC Caribbean. As part of our strategy for implementing our deliverables, we thought it very useful to divide the region into 3 subregions. We have our northern subregion constituting Bahamas, Belize, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Jamaica. Our eastern subregion constitutes Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And for the southern region, we have Barbados, Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. What we are also endeavoring, and I don't have a slide identifying this, we have also endeavored to create a regional steering committee to facilitate dialogue across the Caribbean region, and we've identified one representative from each of these members to sit in our regional steering committee. We can discuss that more in our breakout sessions, and perhaps tomorrow, because I really want to focus on the legal aspects this morning. The Regional Steering Committee, so far, that committee is designed to have 9 members a representative from each of the sub-region, MTCC Caribbean, members of the industry, as well as member NGOs as part of the shipping industry, all of it to be champions of the project and champions in implementation. So we can discuss that later in more detail if we can find time period within. So let's talk about why we're here, implementation. So our current state, the performance isn't that wonderful, in that while the Caribbean has largely recognized the importance of MARPOL, effective implementation remains elusive. Our IMO's regional advisor, he has indicated that while over 70% of the region has ratified MARPOL, less than 30% actually report effective implementation. Sorry, that's supposed to be 73, 78. I'm sure most of you would have realized that. In the northern region, none of the countries has reported legislation that directly implements MARPOL, and Annex 6 in particular. Notwithstanding this current state, there are existing mechanisms that we can leverage. So let's look at where we are as a region, what sort of framework we have in place. So we all have heard of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. That provides a framework for ocean governance. And sometimes we forget that we have personnel within our Ministries of Foreign Affairs, within our Ministry of Environment, with a responsibility for the implementation of UNCLOS. And you might ask, what does a broad arrangement like UNCLOS have to do with Annex 6 of MARPOL, when MARPOL has come decades after the UNCLOS in 1982? But the UNCLOS was actually quite insightful as to what it should be creating as a framework to facilitate coordination, joint international action with respect to what would be the standards that we would need to implement in the future. So let's take a look at where we are in terms of the northern sub-region. And we'll go a little bit further into these protocols. But right now, if we look at our state of ratification for the UNCLOS, it's a good result. Every single one of your countries represented here today have ratified the Law of the Sea Convention. So there is a start. There is some starting point to assist. The Cartagena Convention is a regional convention that aims to provide a regional framework for marine governance. We will go through the Cartagena, but again, when you're doing the due diligence, you are a contracting party to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The convention identifies areas that we can in fact leverage. So let's look at them. So we're specifically talking about Part 12 of the UNCLOS. I'm not going to go into the maritime zones, but feel free to ask questions if you need clarification on that area. But I want to focus specifically on Part 12 that deals with the requirements that states committed to when they ratified the UNCLOS. So all members here, your countries have ratified the UNCLOS, and you have committed to deal with all sources of pollution of the marine environment. And that includes pollution from vessels. And while in that particular area, I mean, this was being developed in 1982 when we were seeing our first oil spills from supertankers in the 1970s and reacting from that. So the measures for preventing accidents and dealing with emergencies, ensuring safety of operations at sea, those things were taking precedence in terms of the international legislation that was coming out of the IMO and the UN at the time. But at the same time, there is a recognition here of the need to regulate the design, construction, equipment, and operation and manning of vessels. So there you have it, your first foundation from which you can build on. Further, in Article 12, Article 94, an obligation to prevent, reduce, and control pollution of the marine environment. States are required to take action individually, jointly, and as appropriate. When we say as appropriate, that as appropriate has modified over time. As we recognize that different states have different levels of capability in terms of implementation, different levels of access to resources, as appropriate takes on meaning, a new meaning for those of us that are actually resource constrained. So we are required to take all measures necessary to prevent, reduce, and control pollution of the marine environment from any source using the best practical means at their disposal and in accordance with their capabilities. Again, this is underscoring from the Earth Summits of 1992, where we recognize we all have common but differentiated responsibilities. And this is where, again, the EU has been playing a significant role in facilitating projects of this nature for the developing world. Their responsibility, they're trying to build capacity through the developing world. Our responsibility is to embrace the training, embrace the capacity building, maximize its potential to our benefit. We also are required to harmonize our policies with respect to this. And of course, because we're in the maritime sector, of course this makes for efficiency, it makes for trade facilitation, and our maritime policies and our legislation are in alignment with each other. So let's specifically look at what UNCLOS has to say with respect to pollution from vessels. States acting through competent international organizations or the General Diplomatic Conference, meaning you can talk about the IMO, the Caribbean Environmental Program, or any of the institutions that are relevant to this exercise, shall establish international rules and standards to, again, prevent, reduce, and control pollution on the marine environment, taking into account the standards that are applicable in terms of what we're trying to deal with now, in terms of the standards related to shipping. So you have this, and flag states were identified early as one of the key implementers. So you have the UNCLOS identifying that pollution from vessels need to be addressed, and you have the IMO who's actually putting forward progressive projects, facilitating conventions, and creating mechanisms to facilitate implementation. So you have the IMO, as Mrs. Smith identified, you have the GLOMI projects. All of these projects, we have to also look at what they have to offer for us, gather from them, and determine the best appropriate means for implementation. So let's get into flag states. And this is where many of us fall, in that we think, okay, without flag state legislation, there's little that we can do. I will try to convince you, and you can try to tell me otherwise if you don't think. Please feel free to tell me if you don't think this proposal that I will be putting forward to you will not work. But let's look at flag states first. Flag states, of course, are required to adopt the relevant international standards, translate them into the legislation, and translate that into implementing institutions and regulations that then translate into certification as evidence of compliance with the international regulations. Your job as your flag state, not just the evidence of certification, but also to actually ensure that vessels are compliant with the applicable international standards. So as a flag, your duties are fairly clear-cut, but we also understand that most of us do not have required legislation in place. So while that is a constraint of a flag, we still have an opportunity through port state control. But before we get into port state control, I still want to create a framework that I'm laying the platform here in terms of what exists internationally. So you have the UNCLOS Convention with all of these provisions dealing with vessel source pollution and what states are required to do in terms of implementing these international standards to address vessel source pollution. We've identified one of the key institutions involved as the Maritime Administration, as usually the custodian of the flag. So in terms of coastal states, again, the UNCLOS must recognize, because for those of you who are familiar with the Law Sea Convention, the convention itself represents a compromise agreement between the interests of flag states and the interests of coastal states. So you have an obligation as a coastal state to develop policies and to implement laws that will protect your coastline. That is acceptable, that is understandable. Your maritime zones prescribe your jurisdiction, your sovereignty, your sovereign rights. So, and this is respected, but at the same time, there is a responsibility with respect to pollution from vessels. Pollution from or through the atmosphere. This was addressed in 1982 when the UNCLOS was adopted. So we have, as early as 92, a mechanism, and may I remind you all have ratified this convention. So you have a mechanism in place that you can leverage. Find the implementers responsible in your respective jurisdictions and align as much as possible, even if you don't have the mechanism. And yes, there will be jurisdictional conflict in terms of, this is not the responsibility of my ministry, or this is not the responsibility of my agency. But I really do believe with coordination and a clear focus as to what we're trying to achieve, we can surmount these institutional barriers to implementation. Because that's what they really are. The institutional and the jurisdictional conflict create barriers to implementation. So while we're involved in our turf wars and our jurisdiction, as I'm the director and I have the oversight over this particular aspect of operations, keep in mind the big picture. Keep in mind what we signed up to as a country. So let's look at our regional obligations. I believe if we were to go back to this slide, let's look at the status of ratification in terms of the Cartagena Convention. The only country here that is not a contracting party of Cartagena is Haiti. And that still, I am optimistic, will not prevent something that is unsurmountable to us. And we will work with that. This is where we are right now in terms of our legal framework. So skipping ahead now into the Cartagena Convention. Cartagena, its geographic scope is essentially every state that touches the Caribbean Sea. Within the Cartagena, again, you have the expression that of Article 5 that mandates that states develop and take all measures to prevent pollution from ships. So you have this regional mechanism. So we're thinking we're starting from ground zero, but we have an international platform. Now we have a regional platform with the exception of Haiti in terms of where we are building from. And for those of us that say, okay, international conventions are that, and they're usually not enforceable, well, they are not enforceable until they find expression into our local laws. Yes, we accept that. But at the same time, international conventions, they provide a great justification for policy. They provide that platform that gives you the confidence to put forward a policy paper to your cabinets, to your policy makers, in terms of this is what the rest of the world is doing. They have considered this a significant issue. So it gives you that backstop for your policy, that justification, and that rationale that is sometimes hard to create if you don't have an international convention addressing an issue. So you have thus far, we've identified the UNCLOS, and we have a regional framework in terms of the Cartagena. How many of us here are familiar with the work of the Cartagena or work with the UNEP or the Caribbean Environmental Program? One. Don't be shy. Two. Great. So I would say let's familiarize ourselves with this institution. What they determine as priorities is what we feed to them as priorities. So if we need to identify that this is an initiative that we need to partner with them for effective implementation, we have to signal that as a region. We have to signal that you can use MTCC Caribbean as a vehicle, or you can do so through your own state. But we need to be singing from the same song sheet that we are all about focusing on implementation. So for those of you that are not familiar, the Cartagena Convention is a wider framework agreement that focuses on the development, the sustainable development and marine environmental protection of the wider Caribbean region. It was adopted in 1983 and entered into force in 1986. has since developed the Oil Spills Protocol, or Specially Protected Areas and Wildlife Protocol, and our Land-Based Sources of Marine Pollution Protocol. Perhaps there is room for a fourth protocol. So this essentially is the area of responsibility for the Cartagena Convention. The Cartagena Convention identifies the UNEP as the implementing agency, but much of the work is actually done through the Caribbean Environmental Program and the Caribbean and Regional Coordination Units. So I don't want to spend too much time on Cartagena, but you have here, again, a mechanism that we can leverage in the region. So let's look at our state of ratification of MARPOL in the northern region. We have Bahamas, Belize, Jamaica having acceded to MARPOL Annex 6. So yes, this is a little bit discouraging because we have to work in terms of our legislation to make this happen. But as I said, all is not lost. This is our current state of ratification. It is our legal framework, but don't underestimate the power of best practice in the maritime sector. Because in the maritime sector, vessels usually need to comply with the trading regime where they're trading. They need to comply with the ports that they need to access. So let's leverage that. Let's not dwell on the fact that our own local frameworks are somewhat deficient. So that takes us into port state control. Now this, I think, represents a brilliant opportunity in terms of supporting the objectives of the flag states. So port state control within the Caribbean, and let's talk about the Caribbean region, means insular and coastal states and territories with coasts in the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico, as well as waters of the Atlantic adjacent to those states and territories. So you have this port state control mechanism that is a creature of the Caribbean MOU of Understanding. How many of you have worked with this CMOU? There's some more hands showing up. So, I invite feedback as to whether you think this is an institution that we can leverage. So let's see what you're required to do under the CMOU. Each administration will establish and maintain an effective system of port state control with a view to ensuring that without discrimination as to flag, foreign merchant ships visiting the ports of the state will comply with the standards laid down in relevant instruments. So we'll have a look at the relevant instruments, and I apologize for that slide in advance. 18 conventions I wanted to list there. But let's focus on no more favorable treatment. It essentially means that even though your flag may not have implemented these and may not have certified you for this, if there is an international convention that prescribes standards with respect to that vessel, when you're in a port state control will survey your vessel for compliance with those applicable international standards, notwithstanding the state of your flag. So you see the opportunity there. Where flag state fails, port state can pick up. So as I said, this is a little bit difficult to see, but the CMOU is currently involved in the implementation of these 18 conventions. And of course, as I highlighted there, the MARPOL. So with respect to the CMOU, this is where we have our mechanism for implementation. With respect to data gathering, perhaps we can even leverage this for data gathering. So I decided to go in a little bit more detail in terms to make sure that we are on the same page of our interpretation of no more favorable treatment. In applying that to section 2.4 that we're referring to, that is in terms of determining compliance with those 18 conventions, ships entitled to fly the flag of a state which is not a party to a relevant instrument listed in section 2 that we just saw, and does not provide with certificates representing prima facie evidence of satisfactory conditions on board, shall receive the detailed inspection. And in making such an inspection, the surveyor should follow the same guidelines as provided for ships to which the relevant instruments are applicable. So there you go. Even though you don't have it as a flag, if you're a contracting party to the CMOU, you have an opportunity here to implement the best available practices and the internationally accepted standards through port state control. So what are the countries and territories involved in the CMOU? Not everyone here is a participant in the CMOU, but I would strongly recommend that you consider this as an opportunity to supplement your efforts as a flag state in the region. So you have 13 states and 9 overseas territories participating with the CMOU in the region. Yeah, so this, again, I was trying to get all the legislation that we've accumulated, and I really want to acknowledge Michael, who has been painstakingly collating the legislation and trying to summarize it. We intend to also create a technical document with the state of the legal and institutional framework of all the regions, but we're going to do it by sub-regions right now. So right now we have a draft that has been substantially completed by Michael in terms of the collation of the legislation, the maritime relevant legislation in the region. And as I indicated, none of the territories actually have legislation that deals with MARPL, but you do have some measure of maritime legislation, whether in draft form or in place, that we can explore, not as direct implementers, but an opportunity to synergize with existing institutional players for implementation. And this is where I hope when we work more together, that the discussions will help us crystallize. By sharing our respective experiences, we will develop that sort of know-how and perhaps leave here with a proposal as to how we can do it. How can we do it with the existing institutions that touch and concern environmental governance? So this in summary is our, and thank you very much, Tevin, for this beautiful slide, but this essentially is our legal framework of implementation for MARPL Annex 6. We have our United Nations Framework Convention, the UNFCCC, you have the UNCLOS, you have Kyoto, you have the Paris Agreement. All these are influencers in terms of the IMO MARPL Convention. We have our regional initiatives in terms of the Cartagena Convention. We have the CMOU. We have international regional initiatives in terms of the GLOMI project and the global MTCC network. We have a brilliant opportunity here to leverage these institutions to our advantage. Let's not decry our current state of legislation, because that is going to make our progress as an industry reliant very heavily, and it is, on, I don't want to say politicians, but, you know, but we really need to try to manage them as well. So, and we understand the difficulty in getting maritime as a priority on our legislative agenda. You know, so, I mean, when I hear Jamaica lamenting the state of their legal framework, I tell them, at least you celebrate you have a maritime authority. Our maritime authority has been, what, 15, 20 years in the making, and it's still in draft legislation. And so many times people put everything on hold, waiting to exhale, waiting for that creation of this authority that's going to solve all our maritime problems. It isn't really, at least not for the next 10 years after they're formed, because capacitating those institutions that are going to be state funded will also be a challenge. So our best opportunity for implementation is to harness the initiatives that are currently existing, align with them, and find mechanisms for implementation. So we have 3 core jurisdictional opportunities here. We have our responsibility as a flag, which we recognize we have limitations based on the legislative constraints. But we have a port state mechanism that is existing, operational, and fairly successful. We have our coastal jurisdiction as well. Let's leverage them. So states that are not a party to CMOU, we can explore joining the CMOU as an avenue for harmonized implementation. While the framework arrangement exists, we need to tap into the implementing agencies. As I have been emphasizing, port state control supports flag state implementation, and the no more favorable treatment allows for implementation and enforcement in the absence of flag state legislation. The commercial risk of port state control detentions therefore creates an incentive for compliance for vessels flagged in non-convention countries. Let's remember that maritime is commercially driven. So if we know that the CMOU is a powerful entity within the Caribbean region, we also recognize then that vessels will be showing a tendency for compliance. So as I close now, let's bring us back as to how we as the MTCC can help. Our objective essentially is to mitigate emissions of the maritime sector, specifically within the Caribbean region. Our ambition, not as MTCC Caribbean, but as the Caribbean region, we should be looking to have the Caribbean as an emissions controlled area. We as the MTCC Caribbean, we also aim to facilitate the uptake of available energy efficient technology throughout the Caribbean region. That again, in terms of determining what is the available technology to the region, will require communication. It will require confidence in communication as well. And that confidence is built from trust. We need to be able to know that we are communicating with you and you are feeding us information that is reliable, and if you also buy in to what this project means to the Caribbean region. That harmonized approach to data gathering and information sharing, as I mentioned in the opening remarks this morning, if we do this well, this creates an opportunity that we can leverage the MTCC framework for future multilateral environmental agreements. And as MTCC Caribbean, and also as the University of Trinidad and Tobago, I can state that we have an enduring commitment to promoting sustainable development in the Caribbean region.